Back with Scott. Before we hit the intro, I want to remind you guys to join in the conversation. Do a little commenting, and we will put it up here. How are you doing today, Scott? You doing all right?
Yeah, not bad, not bad.
Okay, good.
It's a little cold. It was a little cold this week, and now it's starting to warm up. So that's always good this time of year.
Yeah, you're Virginia, right?
No, I'm in Pennsylvania. I was in Virginia. Yes.
That's right. Yeah, a little higher up there. Okay, well, let's hit the intro. Get into it.
This is not a show. It might not even be a connection. Here's Judah and Guest.
Judah and Guest, my guest again. Another Monday, another discussion about art and philosophy and religion and whatever else, theology, whatever else comes up. Glad to have you on again, Scott. I want to just jump right into it. Last time we sort of left on a cliffhanger talking about kitsch art, and you started to kind of talk about it and how not one of your favorite things, but really didn't have a chance to dig into it.
Yes, so kitsch is a very nebulous term. And certainly it has a very definite beginning to its origin in the German language. And
kitsch
that
meaning
would be
trash, right? Yeah,
trash, garbage, right.
Yeah.
And it's from the word kitchen, not like a kitchen like where we make food, but kitchen with a couple other letters in there, meaning to take out the trash.
See, that's funny because I had said that off the cuff the other day that it meant trash, or no, it meant kitchen. It came from the same word as kitchen, but then I looked it up and I was like, oh, kitchen where we make food comes from kutch, right?
Yeah,
like
it's a different root. Yes.
Yeah. But there is a kitchen that is for trash or something, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So how does it become? How does that become a kind of art? Like, why are we celebrating trash?
Yeah, well, before you get to that which is the new kitsch movement or the kitsch philosophy, which kind of has its roots in the Scandinavian painter Odd Nerdrum, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before you get there, it takes on negative connotation in the form of, well, art criticism. And this opens up a whole broader discussion about the modern use of the word art. And our understanding of the word art isn't the same as it was before the 18th century, Renaissance time and leading up to the 18th century. What happened is in the middle of the 18th century, in some ateliers or studios, workshops in Munich, this idea of kitsch as a way of speaking derogatory about things, ways of painting reflecting on the past came in, and so the kitsch signifiers at that point became the things that they didn't like were repeating old, copying old ways,
like art tropes or what?
Sort of, yeah, painting like the old masters, past masters.
Okay.
That would be one aspect of it. They basically were going against the Aristotelian thread. So Plato had the idea, that kind of the ideal side, and he said, a lot of this stuff is not what you want to do. You just mimic it as best you can. So like basically historical representation is all you want to really shoot for. And Aristotle said, no, actually drama and is really good. And so Immanuel Kant picks up Plato and says, we'll get into Immanuel Kant shortly, but the idea is that it's really about pre-born talent and genius, and you shouldn't have to study You either have the skill or you don't, and
Interesting.
you really don't know that you're doing art when you don't know that you're doing art. So, in other words, you do what you're
So
doing when
that
you don't
was
know what you're doing.
that was the original kitsch movement. It was
So, it's not a very precise moment. It happened about over 80 years. It
would you say
started.
that it started with like criticism of art where they
Mhm.
were calling
Yeah,
it trash, and then they tried to
yeah.
subvert, then there was a group that subverted that, flipping the script and making it their own, owning the trash mantle?
Well, that's the very modern. Like that didn't happen
Okay.
until this time between, specifically it has its roots really vocally and philosophically in Odd Nerdrum, who in 1998, we'll get to he had a retrospective in
Mm.
Oslo, his home, his stomping ground, um, where he kind of defined the kitsch philosophy. But before we get there,
Mm.
going back to the mid 1700s, they're saying we don't want to look at the past masters anymore. That's
Mm.
not good. That's trash.
Mm.
That we don't want sentimentality. That's what the part of drama that they really have a problem with, sentimentality. They say this is
Ah,
actually very barbaric. You're lying to people, and
too
and they're
sappy.
not wrong in this. They're not wrong in one sense. If you think about it, there is an account in Augustine of him going to see a tragic play, and I don't know where this is recorded, but I've heard it recounted. I'd like to go back and look at the actual historical record, but the idea is that he saw this tragic drama, and
Yeah.
afterwards he felt guilty because he had lost sight of the world that he knew to be the world that God rules in, and he
Mm.
had temporarily forgotten about that world, forgotten about God, and he actually enjoyed seeing these tragic elements in someone suffer, and that bothered him.
Interesting. Ooh.
And think about that, Augustine. Just
Yeah.
put a pin in it, because when we come into
Okay.
what Odd Nerdrum says later in his
Yeah.
retrospective, it's kind of says that in a totally different way. But
Okay. Interesting.
so now you have the kitsch term taking on this idea of things that they're railing against. They don't want the old masters. They don't want repeating the past. They don't want sentimentality. And the other thing
Mm.
is what they are railing against. They're saying that's unoriginal. We want originality.
Mm.
And and
Mm.
I, originality has its own problems, and we'll talk about
Right. You
that.
got to you got to define originality, right? Like, and that's
Mhm.
that's sort of something I struggled with growing up, is defining originality in art in particular, right?
Yes.
It's because that can
Well,
be quite dangerous. Originality can be
mhm.
quite dangerous when it comes to messages, right?
It can be very dangerous, in multiple
Mm.
ways, but also even just on a purely aesthetic standpoint, it it is vulnerable to become novel and to become
Mm.
it is the moment it's realized as being original,
Yeah.
it's like driving a car off the car lot. It's so temporary, and you can't keep up with originality. I remember growing up watching
It's fleeting.
Madonna. Yeah, I
Mm.
remember watching Madonna continuing to reinvent herself over and over again until it just declined and declined. You see artists, very few artists could be truly original and they can reinvent themselves and it's still good. Like Prince
Mm.
would probably be one of the outliers. Whether you like him or
Mhm.
not, the guy was incredibly talented. There are outliers that are truly, in many ways, original. They're kind of unicorns. But to be honest, the the that kind of level of talent, as the ideal, to set that up and say this is what you should aspire to, it's not encouraging, because
Hmm.
99.9% of us have to work hard at our crafts to
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
to do something really good. And so why would, I mean, yeah, well, let's celebrate that. That's great. Even Mozart spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on the piano. Uh, and certainly Prince worked hard at his craft as well. So let's not
Yeah.
even with them put aside the idea that they had to work for what they attained.
But that's an interesting question. Do you think there are those? Do you think that art comes natural to some people? Or do you believe that everybody has to work at it to be excellent?
I think everyone has to work at it to be excellent. I think that many have, natural skills they're able to fall into it a little easier. But for the most part, I mean, when we're looking at people that do incredibly, just a huge body of work, that they're seen as the real genius in the true sense of the word, because that word is so overrated and
Genius.
overused.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that when you really look at those types of people, you see a very strong trend, a very strong work ethic trend in their
Mm,
lives. You
mm,
typically see that, and look at the people in the Renaissance. Not only did they not only did they do things well, but they did many things well. The idea of the
mm,
Renaissance man, and that's one of the challenges I heard from someone who's really part of this philosophical think tank of the Kitsch movement. He says painters and sculptors, they need to stand on more legs. In other words, don't
mm,
just paint, do other things, because it's hard
mm.
to just make a living on it. Leonardo was an engineer and a painter and a sculptor, and he did a lot of things. An architect. A lot of those guys were like that.
Well, it's interesting. Do you, doing a lot of things. Do you feel like that what that brought up for me is, is there a sense in which a certain kind of art is just dead? Like the onset of video and
Hmm.
photography in general,
Right.
has it killed a certain segment of art?
I wouldn't say it's killed it, but in anymore, I think photography in many ways, well, it depends on which venue of photography you're talking about as well, because photography as a fine art is on the
Mm-hmm.
decline. I can
Mm.
I can say that based just on looking at all of the newsletters I get from all of the galleries in the world, and what I just have to look at their emails and see what the first thing that they're promoting is, and hardly any of it's photography. Proportionally, there's
Really?
in the pie graph, there's probably, I don't know, if I were to put a number on it, 15-20% that's photography.
Yeah.
But even a lot of that's not just straight photography.
A
So
lot
that's
of
the
it is
fine art.
like utility. It's like social media. It's like
Mm-hmm.
graphic arts, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so photography, now if you're looking at photography in terms of like the entertainment arts, like magazines and
Mm-hmm.
things like that, even that's
Mm-hmm.
not certainly the images are still being captured and used, but not in even magazine form anymore. Like that publishing is going by the wayside, and images on social media, that's really where you see photography being used, and it's heavily affected. But in that way, I would consider that to be a true definition of kitsch in many ways, because it's
What would be
taking,
the true definition?
well, just the idea of just elevating something and presenting it as though it's something really profound and good, but it's actually trash in many ways.
Ah,
Because I think the contents
okay.
of a lot of what they're trying to, the messages they're trying to send, you were talking about or
Yeah.
alluding to the idea of social media and being used as a voice for these other ideas, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
big part of it. Artists today are being encouraged to be puppets that just parrot the mantras that the zeitgeist wants to be put out there, and that's a dangerous side of the arts as well. And that's another thing and that really came from Hegel, who refined Immanuel Kant, who said, yes, the genius is what you're looking for. You don't want to, that what Immanuel Kant did in his critique of judgment is he got rid of the craft, or like the craft and the technical side of it, really looked down upon that. And then Hegel swept his ideas up into the idea of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. And that really took Kant to where it needed to be to set us up for what we're seeing now, with the idea that what you see. Okay, for instance, I was mentioning these email newsletters that I get from all these galleries from around the world, many of which I work with and many of which I don't, but I just keep getting their emails, and I scroll through them. What you find is easily 95 to 97% of it, easily, if it's not primarily so there's an image that'll come up and then a little blurb. That blurb is going to be about we were talking about this last week, 2 weeks ago, when we talked about the artist being more important than the art. Okay, so you're going to get this biographic detail about the artist, and you're getting this information about, and usually it's the poster children on these blurbs, and the ones that they're promoting are often, they have a socio-economic background that is not mine, and it will never, it's a totally different situation.
Yeah.
And there's this whole story about how, how they got to where they are, and the social subtext, which is actually our social superstructure being imposed, and it's supposed to prop up this work, and you have to understand all this to really understand their work. You have to do all this reading and research, and it's that's what you find. And so, but those artists then are being taken by the galleries, and their messages, their art is about all of this social subtext, social superstructure that they're promoting, the zeitgeist, spirit of the age. So
interesting. Are you saying, so what I hear you saying is that the spirit of the age right now is sort of this emphasis on social activism?
Yes.
And it's coming across clearly and loudly in a lot of these art movements. And I've seen it, and I've been part of it, actually, as I've worked with a lot of with that population, and tried, like, the thought, wow, what we should do is get you involved with art, However, there is a general lack of concern for honing the art, right? It's like you said, it's all about, well, what is good art anyways? It's more about the story, and that's a scary approach for not just art, but as we approach helping people, as we approach relationships in general, not having any kind of standard of excellence, right?
Yes. There you go. Now you're talking.
Then what happens is we're promoting good feelings, right? We're promoting niceness. I'm really not sure what we're promoting, but we're promoting people. We're helping. We're uplifting people without any kind of real structure to keep it going, right? It's like, or you got to just kind of pick and choose too, because you can't do it. You can't just uplift everybody, and much to the chagrin of many people, the reality is you can't uplift everybody. You just can't. I can't.
Yeah. I mean, there's this very constant beat of trying to make the everything in the short term better, right? there's what you don't find are discussions about longevity, unless it has to do with like climate control and that kind of that narrative and that whole aspect of things. But other than planet Earth and like when it comes to our lives and the interior of our lives,
Mhm.
no, they that again they want to keep that's why they don't want the sentimentality, they don't want the drama, they don't want the pathos of the old
Yeah.
masters and the old ways of painting and sculpting and the
Mm.
old ways of the poetics of what basically what Aristotle laid out in poetics.
Well, they don't want the pain of all that,
Hmm.
right? Like there's
Right.
the pain of the
Hmm.
representation, the pain of the work that it takes as well. You know,
Yeah,
the struggle it takes to get into that and to pull it out is it's painful.
it's a lot of work. And then the other pain that you were talking about, which would be connected to the drama, is that catharsis, and they don't feel comfortable with that at all. That's a bad word for them. Uh, you were mentioning.
Well, and well,
Go
we
ahead.
say them too, but I mean the truth is that I struggle with it as well. I I tend to be much more kitschy in my. I mean, we talked a little bit about it last week, where I tend to be when I do my art is a lot more cartoony. You know, it's always like
No, I love
there's
it.
an
Yeah,
there's an
that's good.
aspect of like it's always now that we're talking about it, I realize it's always like this. It's always too happy or
Well, I mean,
too colorful or too bright. You know.
there's nothing wrong with illustration. I would say that's more like illustration than I would say that it's kitschy.
Mm.
And that you have to also keep in mind that those are two totally different things. Illustrative work can be very. I love illustration. There's a lot of illustration work that's really meaningful.
Mm.
Certainly, Norman Rockwell was on that line. You could look at some
Mm.
of his works and think of him as being very painterly, but at the end of the day, he was more of an illustrator in his approach. But there's such a life to it. So I mean, there's nothing
Mm.
wrong with illustration, but and to look back. And by the way, those were really good. I especially love the face, all the contrast there. It was great.
Oh, well,
Um,
I need to work on the sword. It's not very shiny. Something wrong with the sword.
that's
But
okay. That's all right.
Josh says Joshua is tuning in. What's up, Joshua? He says it's always
Arr.
pirates. He's talking about my obsession with pirates. I do have a little bit of obsession with pirates, but this was actually
Yeah.
from a group of paintings I was working on. There was a local bar that I noticed they had a lot of people's art, like local art. And I said, and it was called the Scalawag. I said, hey, how about I do you a whole like just a section of pirates? And they
Mhm.
liked that idea, but I never followed through, and they went out of business.
Well, you mentioned something just a little bit ago. You're talking about standards, and you were we were
Mm,
we were looking. We had show and tell last week, and last time, and you showed a couple of your pieces. And one of
mm,
them was more proportionate than the other, and but the
mhm,
other one, which had two figures, had drama, and that's the one that I
mm,
remembered and I'm drawn to
mm,
because we want drama now. Just some concrete stuff because obviously you enjoy making these works, and I think I'm encouraging you should keep doing it, even if you just do it as a way of de-stressing and you're not
mhm,
like I'm gonna like do something great with this. I would encourage you
mhm,
to keep doing it because and the way and as far as the proportions and things like that, this comes back to standards. The way you fix that is once COVID's over, or maybe locally you have art associations. They're around. I'm sure you can find them. And maybe one Tuesday night of each month they have live nude drawing. You pay for like a $5 for a 2-hour session to go there with your sketch pad and just draw live nude models, because that's the only way you're going to fix those things is learning how the human body works. And
mhm,
photographs don't do it. Photographs
Mm.
don't do it because they're static images. And what happens is you're
Yeah.
drawing, and in the small of someone's back, you start drawing this shadow, and then they're trying to be as still as possible, but they slightly shift, and you're like, oh, the shadow's gone. What happened? And you just learned
Interesting. Yeah.
you just learned about a muscle that
Ah.
you could look in an anatomy book and see where they actually have taken off the human skin and they've shown you where all the muscles. That's helpful, but it
Mhm.
doesn't show you how it works. And so
Mhm.
when you see
Mhm.
it, how the subtleties of how the human body moves when unclothed, you
Mm.
will fix all those proportions. Once a
Mm.
month, once a
Interesting.
month, once every other month, just go out, draw, come back. I guarantee
Yeah.
you'll improve. And now
Now,
your standard, the standard, the criteria is improving.
well, is it improving or is it shifting? I guess there's two things you said there is that there's a standard for drama and there's a standard for
Mm-hmm.
more accurate representation. Now,
True.
do those coincide? Do you need accurate representation
Yeah.
to
Right.
better to better represent to better what am I saying to capture drama?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's what I would say. Because this is a question I've heard this debated fiercely, not fiercely like heated, but just people with very strong opinions on both sides that
Hmm.
value they have the same value system. They would say, and some of them would say the Kitsch value system, the new Kitsch philosophy. Uh,
Hmm.
but basically, they like the old masters. They like that kind of stuff, like objective criteria by which you can
Hmm.
measure. You can at least have a conversation.
Hmm.
And some say, okay, it's execution. So
Hmm.
to your point, the technical precision. And
Hmm.
then the other camp would say drama. Get that right. And even if it's not quite technically perfect, it's fine. A good example of that would be El Greco. I don't know if you're familiar with El Greco, but he had very elongated figures, but the drama is
Hmm.
so beautifully portrayed. We'll have to do
Hmm.
on a future one. We'll have to do some show and tell, or I'll send you some
Hmm.
images, and you can throw them up on the screen here for us.
Yes.
And El Greco is really good. Modern artists, when they look back, they try to claim the old. They don't hate the old masters. They just say we don't want to repeat that. That gets in the way of progress. Which progress is its a whole nother thing. Which if there's a show I would like to, as I'm going to gaslight you now, if there's a show I'd like to see you and Captain Blackburn do, I'd love to get you guys to talk about progress.
Ah, all
Because
right.
progress
Interesting.
can be
Yeah.
better in some spheres than others. The
Hmm.
medical field, for instance, progress can be in many ways good, but does it need to be like the focus of every field? I'm not convinced, but not
Hmm.
to get too sidetracked here. But
Hmm.
yeah, the idea. So back to the drama versus execution. I think you need
Hmm.
the best place to be is to have a good sense of both.
Hmm.
But if I were to die on one hill, I would want to be able to convey the drama, even if I had to sacrifice a
Hmm.
little bit on execution. Because um, Anthony van Dyke is a Dutch. He was a Flemish painter who, or sorry, Dutch painter who had incredible sense of accuracy. There are others that were incredibly crisp. Ong was one of them. I mentioned him 2 weeks ago. I
Hmm.
in GRES, extremely precise. But when you look at their works, it's the other artists of their time that were painting, the other painters and that had a little bit. They took a little bit off. They probably could render to equally a degree, but they had more painterly qualities and they focused more on the drama. And they're the paintings you
Hmm.
remember. If you remember Rembrandt, you don't remember Anthony van Dyck. You remember
It's interesting. Yeah.
Eugene Delacroix. You don't remember, or even let's see another French painter. Well, you don't remember Ong though. Ong is not the one you think about.
No.
Jacques Louis David would be another one. You
Well,
would
let's
remember
see.
him.
Real quick. So Joshua says,
Hmm.
progress. What is it?
So
That may
there,
be our
the
next. Maybe
the
that's
seeds
the Wednesday.
planted.
Wednesday.
See,
It's in there. Well,
see.
so yeah, see, that's the difficulty for me is that I was raised loving my father and I and my family
Hmm.
loving Van Gogh, who
Hmm.
is the representation aspect of it. Is so I guess I want to pick apart this idea of not pick apart, but sort of separate out what is, you know, representing a
Hmm.
certain thing. Take drama out of it. Although I mean, Van Gogh is extremely dramatic in his, I think, in his portrayal. But can you be technically correct as far as in one area, so like developing color,
Hmm.
and be not so technically correct in terms of the shape of the human body?
Oh, yes, yes, definitely. There can be elements of that. Some I was watching someone who uh, a painter do the beginning of her artwork, her painting. It was a portrait that she was working on. She starts with a medium ground like me, where it's just kind of a pinkish reddish tone instead of white, a medium ground.
Hmm.
And she starts putting colors in, and she's using warm colors. I always use cool colors,
Interesting.
which that's actually more against the grain to use warm colors. So I was intrigued. I was learning, and she also, one thing that I do, but when you're using a medium ground, which is already toned up to like a, if you were to take a picture of that blank canvas, instead of white, it's going to read kind of gray. So
Yeah.
when you're painting the face, you just have to start putting highlights in. So you
Hmm.
almost don't have to paint the shadows of the nose because they're already there. You just don't. You can just augment them, and you can end up painting less. So the idea, though, is that now you can play with color, because when you're
Hmm.
starting from white, you have to paint in the shade and you have to paint in the highlights, or at least
Yeah.
or work the highlights, because you can't just use the white when you're painting in oils. With watercolor, yes. With watercolor, it's different. Again, the mediums matter, but yeah, you could be. Color is very tricky. You really that's why when I'm encouraging you to go draw and draw the live human figure. If there, I just said I would die on the hill of drama, but I'm
Yeah. It
confident.
surprised me. It surprised me.
I'm confident enough in my ability to render forms where, do I want to get better at that? Obvious, always. I do. I always want to get better at rendering form, but I'm confident enough that I can get what I need if I work at it enough. I might have to start over. I might have to wipe the painting down a little bit and go backwards to go forwards. So there you go. Progress. What's progress? Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
sometimes on the smaller level, when you're working in a
Progress.
painting, to
What
go
is it?
backwards is to go forwards, scratching it back, getting sandpaper out. But
Mm.
I want to get the drama right, and um but the thing that will say, like, I would say a better rendered painting, like the forms are captured there, it looks like an arm, and that has dimensionality to it, and a
Hmm.
hand and fingers. If it looks, even if it's badly colored, I would rather see a good, well composed picture with good form and badly colored than I would a really well colored picture that's badly formed. That's why I'm not a Van Gogh fan, but I mean, he, he hashtag Van Gogh is overrated.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, I'm not,
Wow.
I'm not, I'm
Okay.
not. But anyway, uh,
Huh.
I I would
We're gonna have
say
to end this real quick. No, I'm just kidding. Um,
cancel
well,
culture.
just yeah. Let's stay with that really quick
Okay.
because what the a thought came to mind that
Hmm.
could it be that the technicalities, right? The more precise technicalities are super important in portraying, in expressing. I think that's the word I was looking for. Expressing a certain message. So drama relies on the technical aspects of it because haphazard expression might be able to get across the right message, but not the precise message that you can with precise technicalities. Because could that be part of it?
Yes. Yeah. For instance, here's another tease that we could do another not a show on. I'm now I'm unearthing an idea that I had and had developed the idea 11 years ago. Not totally, probably 95% there. But it's an idea for a religious cycle. So like a cycle of paintings, like often churches will do a cycle of the life of Christ. That's the two popular ones are the life of Christ cycles, and you go around the church, inside the interior of the church, usually stained glass windows, or some it can be paintings or frescoes or whatever, and they detail the life of Christ, and it has a very chronological movement. Another popular one that you see is the Stations of the Cross. That's another popular cycle. So I developed the idea for a cycle that I'm now coming back to, and it's 12 paintings, but the 12 paintings, they all have. So you enter. Very quick tease. We have to come back to this later because I already want to work on this. I want to get your take on this. But the idea, you walk in, it's all chronological. On the left side, comes around to the chancel where the altar is, where you take communion. Comes back around the right side. It's chronological, but the paintings on each side that are in direct relation to each other look to each other thematically, biblically. So like.
Interesting.
So the drama, there has to be the right scene. I'll tease one. Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Right. Okay. So then the angel typically comes in and with I've looked at scores and scores of paintings on this topic, trying to figure this one. This is the most technical part of this whole cycle that I'm working on. The angel typically comes in is grabbing the hand or blocking the blade, from coming down, and below is Isaac bound up, and that there's various ways that's rendered. But Abraham's always looking up, typically looking up at the angel. He's caught surprise. Well, in mine, the angel's other hand is pointing to the other side of the sanctuary, right? And Abraham's already turned and looking that way, and so this comes back to
across.
and this comes back to where Jesus says to the Jews, "Abraham saw my day and rejoiced," right?
Wow.
And so what is he looking at? Well, he's looking at Jesus coming down, the descent from the cross. The sacrifice has been made. He's the ram in the thicket, and then the ram is also looking over there too. So
that would be
this
awesome.
this is got to be technically. So now you have drama. I've got a sliver on rendering it. Technically, it has to look good. Otherwise, it's going to be terrible. But I have to render those forms right, and I have to get the eyesight right. If Abraham's
has
not
to be some connection, right?
Yeah. If he's not looking over there, if he's looking to the left or to the right or up, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's critical that lands.
These are going to have to be big pieces, right?
They're big. Yeah, they're going to be big.
Yeah. Ooh, man, I can't wait to see this.
I'll lay out the whole. I'll lay out the whole cycle for you, but that can be a whole nother thing because I'm trying to work on the end. Actually, I'd like to get an opinion from someone who has no skin in the game on this.
Okay.
But the drama is rich there, and I want to tap into that. I want to get that. So that's one where I can't choose. I have to render it. I've got to be technically precise in this. I'm going to be setting up, models to work on this and actually have physical bodies that are in place and I will be taking pictures and working partly live and then probably from pictures, but
Hmm.
it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to
Yeah,
get
no
there.
doubt. But that sounds like the payoff will be amazing. I want to come to that.
If it works.
I want to come even if it doesn't.
Yeah.
So, but let's
We'll
get
get a
back
good
to
laugh. Yeah. Yes.
we
Kitsch.
put a pin in Augustine,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
what
So
you said
this
we're going to come back to that. What do we need to get to before we come back to that, or have we already talked about that?
I think we're in pretty good place here. Here's the thing. As we approach that, there are a couple of movements that are 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 really interested in representational art. Not so. In other words, like the values of the old masters and so forth, and they want to continue that. They want to continue that, and they're not part of necessarily the new kitsch movement, where the new kitsch movement has flipped, in some ways the narrative and try to make kitsch a positive term. So one of them
They're
would be
trying to subvert the narrative by making
yeah,
trash art.
yeah, right. But one such group is called the Representational Art Conference, or TRAC, and they have videos on YouTube, really good stuff if you're interested. And then another one's called Face, to a lesser degree, one's called Face, Figurative Art Convention and Expo. So they're like, haha, you had to put Expo. What about Expo's not in convention? They had to spell the word face. So, but anyway,
Oh,
both
I
both
get it.
of the
Okay.
movements, if you go to their sites, they have to see a well thought out vision of what they want to do and about restoring, really trying to bring representational art back into the main art narrative. And the problem is they don't have a strong voice in that direction. And so my argument for the kitsch movement is that they have both. And uh, in Odd Nerdrum, he's really I'm not a big fan of his work. I like some of his paintings a lot. I love his ability to render form, and he's a really good painter. I just don't like a lot of his work. But
It's interesting.
his
You've mentioned
philosophy,
him
though,
more than any other artist on the show.
well, he spent 30 years basically from 67 to 98 painting like crazy, and he got a ton of criticism by the art community, by the fine arts. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
not like-minded people, but the big art world, the part of the art world that actually will spend 20s and hundreds of thousands of dollars for a painting. So not
Mm,
people that buy investment art.
right.
And so they were ripping him constantly. And so at his retrospective,
Mm-hmm.
in 1998 in Oslo, so it's basically his home turf. After enduring 30 years of criticism, he says this, and he redefines kitsch in this way. He says kitsch, uh, to him, is a passionate form of expression on all levels, with the task of creating a seriousness of life, at its best to be so sublime that it brings laughter to silence. I'll read it again. A passionate form of expression on all levels, with the task of creating a seriousness of life, at its best to be so sublime that it brings laughter to silence. He's basically, and he would say
Hmm.
this, just recycling Aristotle from the Poetics. But he's talking about the drama basically,
Yeah.
but in there is also very, you would have to have good form of execution and to do what he's suggesting, to where you bring laughter to silence. So you're kind of bubbly and you're laughing with your friend. You walk into a museum, you see this huge piece of a massive painting, and it just shuts your mouth, and you're like, wow,
Oh, see, I
I'm in another
misinterpreted it.
zone.
I thought he meant you would bring laughter out of silence. So what he's saying is you would something that would bring gaiety
Laughter.
to just serious soberness and
Serious.
sober
Yeah.
people up.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so what you have to do that is, and what he's getting at is really what Aristotle would have, and the ancients would use the idea of techne, which is a craft, a very very well uh, a handcraft in this sense. And
Mm-hmm.
when going back to the mid 1700s, when the kitsch criticism was coming about, the idea was that they would take the arts, the arts of painting, sculpting, poetry, take it away from sciences and liberate it, so that then the criticism wouldn't be there of needing to be precise, which is exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. They, and so now they're, that's why I call shenanigans, and why I agree. This is where I do agree with them, that I wouldn't want, I don't want it to be associated with the art world, because I actually call shenanigans on them, because there's no criteria. There's no objective criteria by which to judge it. And that's a problem, because how do I even
Well,
know if it's good or not?
well, that's interesting because in my thoughts about counseling, what I've found, or just in my experience, what I've found is that I think there's a huge tension in the psychology counseling world, in which they want to be, the field wants to break out of or at least I'll say there's a segment that wants to there's this pushing out to get out of the strict standard criterium, or what is it, criteria, that because counseling is such a there's such a it's such a broad field, and it's so little that is tangible and measurable. And but they can't, because you don't make money unless you tie yourself to the medical, to the quantifiable, right? Like, and it's interesting that I think that artistry used to be much more of a lucrative endeavor. There was a sense, at least a segment that that was tied to a I don't know, what would you call it? Wasn't there were what do you call it? It's like they had understudies, and there was like a whole field, and they would and there still is. However, it does seem to that move outside of to burst outside of standard the criteria of standards, has sort of broken the ability to really make it a lucrative field.
It's hard for people to be successful for a great length of time in today. And I mean the galleries take 50%. I mean they just do. They take 50%.
50%.
Yeah. That's why
Wow.
I won't play the gallery game. I would rather light up a church. Maybe, yeah, if that gets me work, great. If not, I feel like I did something helpful.
Right. Right.
To use the Captain Blackburn word, helpful.
Helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a favorite word.
hashtag helpful. Yeah, I would rather do that. But
Yeah.
anyway, I do think there's a way. I think that culture is ripe now for good representational, dramatic art, a return to the old masters. I think it's ripe for it. But I would not go the gallery way unless it was on my terms, and unless my 50% is where I would want my 100% to be, basically. So
Well, and hasn't YouTube and sort of the decentralization of entertainment, especially in the times of COVID, hasn't it sort of paved the way for this new renaissance in
yeah,
art and art endeavors?
yeah. You gotta find. I think the ways you connect with the collectors directly, and you can do that. I mean,
Mm.
I've seen on Instagram where people have done that, and if I found the problem is
Mm.
if you go to like art news and look at the top 200 collectors, which I do regularly, I chart
Mm.
this. I like not chart it, but I
Wow.
chart it mentally.
Yeah.
There's probably 3 to 5% that actually even deal in old masters. Everyone else
Really?
is either most of it's modern art or contemporary art, and those are two different things.
Mm.
Um, and then or like some kind of ethnic or folk art would be kind of like a lot of the next things. Post-war art, which has its one foot in
What's
modern
that
art.
thing? What'd you say?
Post-war art,
Post-war art.
war like World War
Interesting.
II. So it has a
Yeah.
foot kind of in one foot in modern art, one in contemporary. Like it's kind of its own thing.
Hmm.
But that's really it. And then down the line you get the percentage is so low. But what that tells me, it tells me a few things: that there is a small percentage of people that have a lot of money that
Mm.
that like old master works of art, which tells me they like that look of art. Not you wouldn't. In other words, to try to acquire an old master is more difficult than it is trying to acquire modern art or contemporary art, because there's less
Huh.
of it. It's like most of it's in museums.
Yeah.
So you have to be a
Yeah.
hunter and a seeker to get that stuff.
Mm.
But at least they have an appetite
Interesting.
for it. They have an appetite for it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, that tells me that there's an audience there. And I tell you, if they started collecting more of it that's made today that reflects that it
Mm-hmm.
could start a whole wave. And because a lot of them are mucky mucks friends with each other. They go to each other's parties.
Mm.
They see each other's
Yeah.
with each other's walls. They try to brag. They want to brag
Yeah.
about what they just bought.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but anyway, that
Yeah.
back to I want and all of this. We were talking about coming back to the whole thing of our artists today and the idea of the propaganda side of it, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
like promote the narrative of the zeitgeist, which today,
Mm-hmm.
right now is critical race theory and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's so interesting to me that quote came back into my mind from Andrew Breitbart, the idea that
Hmm.
politics is downstream from culture.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it make I've thought about that phrase since I heard it years ago, but I'm like, it really kind of makes sense, because as 2 weeks ago when had our first discussion, as I mentioned, like cancel culture already happened and started in the mid 1700s,
Mm-hmm.
and progressively got more. So now today, the people that revere the masters, they're not in the main. If you paint like that, you have to do something to make it satirical or campy or ironic. You have to paint
Mm.
white lines over it, or put up,
Mm.
put something humorous in it.
You have to
You
subvert it
know,
somehow.
you have to subvert it, make it an object,
Mm.
and so anyway, and this also, um, the idea that, and my wife posted the question last week about how, um, the moral appetite of culture basically is reflected in
Mm.
its appetite for what it consumes in the arts, and we're
Mhm.
seeing that right now so much. So it's weird that a lot of the culture that had been formed by getting rid of objective criteria. Let's throw out the
Mhm.
sentimentality and the drama. Let's throw out like
Mhm.
precision, in
Mhm.
objective criteria. And another part of it, which I didn't mention, is timelessness is a good thing in art, in painting. Timelessness,
Yes.
because if you just represent
Yes.
your own age, you will die with it. And
Oh, it
so,
becomes anachronistic. Yes.
as opposed to archetypal, which
Right.
lasts. And so,
Yeah.
100 years from now, 50 years from now, so much of this stuff, first of all, the quality, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, it's stuff's already falling apart. It's brand new, and it's a lot of it's falling apart before I can even frame it.
Mm.
So it's
Like physically, literally
falling
falling
up,
apart.
actually falling apart,
Wow.
and and that's a
Huh.
problem. I see
Mm.
that as a violation, a major violation of the artist to the collector. You're just
Mm.
mocking them. These people that are spending
Yeah.
crazy amounts of money for your work. Uh,
Yeah.
but but
See,
anyway,
that's interesting. I had never thought. Uh, you have a perspective that I've never had, and that is with the collector in mind. I've only recently become privy to the fact that the collectors drive the market. Like I
they're
had
the only
never
reason
thought
I
of
bring home a
collectors.
paycheck. They're the only reason I bring home a
Wow.
paycheck. It's not people like you and me. There are we might get one or two people like you and me a year that send us a check or give us their credit card for framing, but
Yeah.
no, it's people with big money. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
Uh, but yeah, it. So that decline, I think, with all those criteria, lack of criteria, has now gotten to the point where now these artists today, there are just they can't be any louder with the narrative echoing the mantras that are being um, upheld in the political narratives that
Yeah.
we see if you scroll through Twitter, Facebook, or any of the major news outlets. And that stuff is they're going to die with their art's going to die with the age. Uh,
Yeah.
some of it will be, and this is where photography is really good. And my wife, Karen, and I, we've had discussions about this because she um, was, documenting some of these riots and things. Like that stuff will survive because it's a
Mm.
historical documenting of a time where
Mm.
something really specific happened,
Yeah.
and that can be of value. But
Yeah.
but most of the works produced by the hand is just garbage. Actual kitsch. But
Actual kitsch.
but the
That
problem
should be the new category. Actual kitsch.
I I struggle with I struggle with the kitsch movement in the name though. I can't do it
Mm.
because the problem is even I don't even have a problem really necessarily is like taking the idea of taking a word that means garbage and then elevating it. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is it's going to take an entire generation of trying to take the spaghetti in people's brains and unwind it and make it because it's confusing because kitsch is a derogatory term. It
Yeah.
always has been. And so how do you think that just
Yeah.
because this one painter who is really good and in many ways and has tons of students who are really good. My favorite living painter is one of his students, but they are going to always struggle with that term kitsch because someone's going to be like,
Yeah.
why? It's confusing. So
Yeah.
I would rather just be called
Well,
a technical painter, you know?
see, and that comes back to the idea of language, and I think that's what I think that is what is important here. I didn't say the word language, but I think what I was thinking is language. If we don't have a clear language,
Mm-hmm.
a precise language,
Mm-hmm.
a useful language to express whatever message that we're trying to express through our art, if it isn't clear, if the language isn't clear and useful, then it it's I don't know, it loses its potency, right?
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
loses its ability to silence laughter.
Yeah.
It loses its ability to touch people because we don't touch people through random circumstance. We touch, we engage with each other and move each other, I think, well, through the Holy Spirit and through God's work through us. And we do that through communication, and clear communication, precise communication. And
Right.
I think that's, I do think that there's an importance there. If we try to undo language and start to call 2 4 and bad good, then there is no true communication, right? We can't really communicate. We're just obfuscating our ability to connect.
Absolutely. If the value of my work is that I can see between people of all ages in a church come, and they can look at that painting, and they can look at that painting, and it helps connect what was not visually a part of those two scenes when Jesus is just talking to Jewish people in the temple, and they can feel, oh, that, yeah, he did in some weird way. And even that is its own kind of echo chamber of
Yeah.
ideas that are true biblical ideas. And if that can be helpful to people, and and small children can look at it and be like, yeah, that's, they can grow from having seen a version of that portrayed, then hey, that's affecting the culture, reversing
Yeah.
what, the idea of the whole the moral hunger, the moral hunger of a culture will come out. To Karin's question last week,
Yeah.
why not start creating that culture first of all in our own homes, having our children consume good stuff, good literature, but in also then our church life, and then with those around us, by celebrating those things that are good. And I think that the reason I think that's good, and the reason drama is really a good place to focus, is that drama isn't just beauty. I love Roger
Yeah.
Scruton. I love his works, but he says he thinks beauty, like we need to recover beauty, and he's partly right. But I don't think beauty is enough by itself. I think because someone else will come over, well, today's art world is saying, why not ugly? And I think it's the dance and the combination of the two, using beautiful people who go through terrible things, or terrible people who come to a beautiful end, and that that relationship, that drama, can be very powerful and very potently used to reshape our culture.
I agree. That's good. And I think that's a good place to end today's discussion, because what I think what you're really helping me see is that it's not good enough just to put a message out there and consume messages, um, haphazardly. There's intentionality, and there is something I really appreciated I've had uh, 2 pastors named Dave really emphasize the Eucharist as something is happening there, and just the emotion, the drama they put into saying that. Um, art, there should be something happening there, and and I and it and I think it can shape us for, like you said, this downstream moral effect. It can shape us to be great. It can shape us to move us towards righteousness, and I think that's what we want, right?
That's what we want. Yeah.
That's what we
Amen.
want. Now, we don't
Yeah.
all want that, so I think we do, and I think we should encourage others. And that's a different discussion. But man, I appreciate you coming on tonight, and
Thanks for having me. Fun.
I love talking about this stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
And we
very
had
good.
looks like Josh was in there,
Yeah.
and Jim Paz and Ovi
Nice.
and
Nice.
Jay. They left some
Awesome.
thumbs ups,
Good.
and I think our video last time got up. What you said, it got up past 100 views, right?
Yeah, I was thinking it's getting close to 150. So hey,
Yeah,
sweet.
yeah. Well, feel free to leave a comment if you're watching this later on. Join the conversation, and I'll definitely. And Scott's really good at interacting too on these in the chat section of these videos.
On the flagship show, not a show.
On all social, unlike you're good. Some people like Josh, I'll say Joshua Blackburn he's not particularly active in the old social media. He's getting more active. But anyhow, what I gotta go. I hear my son coming in here. So thank you for joining us. Thank you everybody else for coming along for the ride. Let's do this again.
Absolutely.
Maybe next Monday, or maybe every other Monday works best.
Yeah.
Huh? Give us a little breathing room or something.
Yeah, it gives me some time to get us queued up for some good material.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna hit end the broadcast, and I'll see you on the other side.
Yeah.